A stranger at the window. It was a quiet Friday evening in late autumn. The air was crisp, and the sun had set hours ago, leaving the small town shrouded in darkness. Sarah, a woman in her mid-30s, lived alone in a charming little house on the outskirts of town. Her home was nestled among the woods, a place she chose for its peacefulness and beauty. The house had large windows that let in plenty of natural light during the day, and she loved the view of the towering trees that surrounded her property. Sarah's evening routine was always the same. After a long day of work, she would settle into her favorite corner of the couch, wrapped in a soft blanket with a cup of tea in hand and a good book to read. This particular evening was no different. The only sounds were the occasional chirps of crickets and the gentle rustling of leaves as the wind danced through the trees. The coziness of the moment made Sarah feel at ease. She enjoyed the solitude her home provided, even though some of her friends found it odd that she chose to live so far from the bustling town center. Sarah appreciated the quiet. It gave her a chance to unwind, to think, and to escape the noise of the world. Little did she know this evening would be far from the peaceful escape she had imagined. As she turned the pages of her book, something caught her attention out of the corner of her eye. A faint movement outside the window made her pause. She glanced up but saw nothing unusual. Dismissing it as the wind swaying the branches of a tree, she returned to her book. But moments later, the feeling returned, a strange sensation, as if someone was watching her. Her heart began to race, though she tried to brush off the thought. It's nothing, she told herself. Just your imagination, but the uneasy feeling lingered, gnawing at the edges of her mind. She glanced at the window again. At first it seemed like there was nothing there. But then she froze. A face was staring back at her through the glass. It was a man, his hair disheveled and his eyes wild like he hadn't slept in days. His face was so close to the window that his breath fogged up the glass. Sarah's chest tightened. She couldn't move, couldn't think. For a moment she was paralyzed with fear. Who was this man, and what did he want? He didn't look like someone who was lost or needed help. There was something about his gaze that sent chills down her spine. Finally, she snapped out of her daze. Gripping her phone with trembling hands, she dialed 911. The operator's calm voice was a small comfort amid the rising panic in her chest. There's a man outside my window, she whispered, her voice shaky. He's just standing there staring at me. The operator asked her a series of questions, trying to keep her calm. Is he trying to enter the house? Not yet, Sarah replied, glancing back at the window. The man hadn't moved. He was still there, his eyes fixed on her. Help is on the way, the operator assured her. Stay on the line with me. Sarah's heart pounded as she turned off the lights in the living room, hoping it would make it harder for the man to see inside. The room plunged into darkness, and for a moment, all she could hear was the sound of her own breathing. But then she heard something else. Footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, coming from her front porch. Sarah's blood ran cold. The man was moving. She clutched her phone tighter, her knuckles turning white. He's on the porch, she whispered to the operator. I think he's trying to get in. Are your doors locked? The operator asked. Yes, Sarah replied, her mind flashing back to earlier that evening when she had double-checked the locks before settling in. She silently thanked her past self for being cautious. The footsteps grew louder, and then she heard the sound of the doorknob rattling. The man was testing the lock. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but she refused to let herself cry. She needed to stay alert. They'll be there soon, the operator said, her voice steady. Stay where you are and keep quiet. Minutes felt like hours as Sarah waited. Every sound seemed to amplify: the creak of the porch, the hum of the wind, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. And then finally she saw them, the flashing red and blue lights of a police car. Relief washed over her like a wave. The man must have seen the lights too, because she heard him running. His footsteps faded into the woods behind her house. Sarah stayed on the line with the operator, who reassured her that the officers were searching the area. It didn't take long for the police to find him. They caught him not far from her house, hiding among the trees. He was a drifter, they said, with a history of breaking into homes. He didn't carry any weapons, but his presence alone had been enough to terrify Sarah. That night changed everything for her. The sense of peace she once felt in her home was gone, replaced by a lingering unease. She couldn't forget the man's face, the way he had stared at her through the window. She installed security cameras around her property and began triple-checking her locks every night. The woods, once a source of beauty and tranquility, now seemed dark and menacing. In the days that followed, Sarah tried to move on, but the memories of that night haunted her. She spoke to her friends about it, and they encouraged her to stay strong. One of them even gifted her a self-defense kit, which she kept by her bedside. Over time, Sarah found ways to reclaim her sense of safety. She joined a local community group, connecting with neighbors she'd never met before. They assured her that the town was generally safe and that incidents like hers were rare. Their support made her feel less alone. Still, every time she sat by her window, she couldn't help but glance outside, half expecting to see another face staring back at her. The stranger's visit had left an indelible mark on her, a reminder that even in the quietest corners of the world, danger could find its way in. The basement intruder, an extended tale. Mike and Lisa were overjoyed when they finally moved into their dream home. It was a beautiful two-story house with large windows, a cozy porch, and a sprawling backyard perfect for hosting summer barbecues or planting a garden. They had worked hard to save for this home, and now they were finally ready to settle down. The neighborhood was peaceful, the kind of place where kids rode bikes down the street and neighbors waved as they walked by. Everything seemed just right until the strange events began. At first, life in the new house was everything they had imagined. Lisa loved decorating their space, carefully choosing curtains, furniture, and art to match their style. Mike, on the other hand, was excited about their backyard. He spent his weekends mowing the lawn, setting up a small vegetable garden, and even building a birdhouse. The couple often joked about how their lives felt like a dream. One night, about a month after they moved in, they were winding down for bed. Lisa was brushing her teeth, and Mike was flipping through a book. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. But suddenly they heard a faint noise. It was a soft, almost shuffling sound coming from below. Lisa paused, toothbrush in hand, and looked at Mike. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Mike listened for a moment and shrugged. "It's probably just the house settling. Old houses make noises all the time," he said, trying to sound reassuring. Lisa wasn't convinced. What if it's something else? Maybe an animal got in, she suggested. Mike sighed but decided to humor her. He grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and made his way to the basement door. The creaky wooden stairs groaned under his weight as he descended into the dimly lit space. The basement was mostly unfinished, with bare concrete floors and stacks of moving boxes they hadn't yet unpacked. He swept the flashlight beam across the room, but nothing seemed out of place. Then he noticed the small window near the ceiling. It was ajar, letting in a sliver of cool night air. Mike frowned. "That's strange," he muttered to himself. He closed the window, made sure it was locked, and headed back upstairs to tell Lisa everything was fine. For a few days, life went back to normal. But then, late one evening, the noises returned. This time they were louder and more distinct, scraping, shuffling, and even a faint thud. Lisa was visibly shaken. "Mike, we can't just ignore this," she said firmly. "What if someone's down there?" Mike hesitated but knew she was right. He decided it was time to call the police. The officers arrived quickly and did a thorough search of the basement. At first, they didn't find anything unusual. But as they moved some of the stacked boxes aside, they uncovered something shocking: a sleeping bag, empty food wrappers, and a makeshift bed tucked into a hidden corner of the basement. It was clear someone had been living there without their knowledge. Lisa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "How is this even possible?" she whispered. The officers explained that it was likely a homeless man who had entered through the open window before Mike locked it. Though the intruder wasn't there at the time, the discovery left Mike and Lisa feeling deeply unsettled. They couldn't believe someone had been living in their home, right under their noses. The couple decided to take extra precautions. Mike secured all the windows with new locks and installed motion sensors around the house. They also put up security cameras to monitor the property. Despite their efforts, a sense of unease lingered. Lisa found herself jumping at small noises, and Mike couldn't shake the feeling that someone might still be watching them. In the weeks that followed, they tried to return to normal life, but the incident had left its mark. Lisa confided in her best friend, Sarah, about what had happened. Sarah was horrified but tried to comfort her. "Maybe it's a blessing in disguise," she said. "Now you know to be extra careful. And at least the police think he's gone for good." Mike, meanwhile, became more withdrawn. He started spending more time working on the house, trying to distract himself from his lingering fears. He added extra lighting to the backyard and even built a fence around the property. But no matter how many improvements he made, he couldn't shake the feeling that their sanctuary had been violated. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, Lisa turned to Mike. "Do you think we'll ever feel safe here again?" she asked softly. Mike hesitated before answering. "I don't know," he admitted. "I want to. But it's hard not to think about what could have happened if we hadn't discovered it." Lisa nodded, understanding his fear. "Maybe we just need more time," she suggested. Time passed, and the couple tried to focus on the positive aspects of their life. They hosted small gatherings with friends, worked on their hobbies, and even adopted a rescue dog named Max. The dog brought them some comfort, as his barking often alerted them to any unusual sounds. Still, the memory of the intruder lingered, like a shadow they couldn't fully escape. One day, Lisa decided to research similar incidents online. She discovered that cases of intruders secretly living in people's homes were more common than she had imagined. She read stories about people finding strangers in their attics, basements, and even crawl spaces. It made her realize how lucky they were that nothing worse had happened. "Mike, look at this," she said, showing him an article about a family who had found an intruder in their attic. "It's scary, but at least we're not alone. Other people have gone through this too." Mike glanced at the article and nodded. "I guess it's a reminder to always be vigilant," he said. Over time, their fear began to fade, replaced by a cautious sense of resilience. They realized they couldn't let the experience ruin their new home. Instead, they chose to view it as a lesson in preparedness. They became more proactive about their security, and their bond as a couple grew stronger as they supported each other through the ordeal. Years later, Mike and Lisa would look back on the incident as a pivotal moment in their lives. It had been terrifying, yes, but it had also taught them the importance of facing challenges together. Their dream home might have come with an unexpected scare, but in the end it became a place where they felt stronger and more connected than ever before. The silent break-in. Emma was a single mom who lived in a cozy suburban neighborhood with her 2 children, Lily and Jake. Her life wasn't easy, but she was determined to provide a loving and safe environment for her kids. Emma worked as a freelance graphic designer, often juggling tight deadlines and household responsibilities. Despite her busy schedule, she always made time to help with homework, prepare meals, and tuck her children into bed with a goodnight kiss. Emma's home was her sanctuary. It wasn't the biggest or the fanciest house on the block, but it was filled with warmth and laughter. She had decorated it with family photos, colorful throw pillows, and little handmade crafts the kids brought home from school. The front yard had a small garden where she and the children planted flowers every spring. For Emma, this house was more than just a roof over their heads. It was a symbol of the life she had built for her family despite all the challenges she had faced. That day had been an ordinary one. Emma had spent the morning working on a client's project while the kids were at school. After picking them up, they stopped by the park for some playtime before heading home for dinner. The evening was filled with the usual chaos of school projects and bedtime routines. By 9 p.m., both Lily and Jake were sound asleep in their beds, and Emma finally had a moment to herself. She settled onto the couch with her laptop, a cup of tea, and a blanket. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of her laptop and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Emma felt a sense of calm as she worked on her designs, the glow of the screen lighting up the room. Hours passed, and before she knew it, the clock struck midnight. As Emma stretched and yawned, she decided it was time to call it a night. She closed her laptop, turned off the lights in the living room, and headed down the hallway toward her bedroom. That's when she noticed something unusual. The front door, which she was sure she had locked earlier, was slightly open. The sight sent a chill down her spine. Her mind raced. Had she forgotten to lock it? No, she was certain she had checked the locks before putting the kids to bed. Fear started to creep in as she considered the possibility that someone might have been inside. Emma's first instinct was to ensure her children were safe. She tiptoed to their bedrooms, peeking in to see both of them sleeping soundly. Relieved but still on edge, she grabbed her phone and quietly called 911. The operator's calm voice helped steady Emma's nerves. She whispered her situation, explaining that she thought someone might have entered her home. The operator assured her that officers were on their way and advised her to stay put and stay quiet. Emma followed the advice, locking herself in the kids' room and grabbing the baseball bat she kept for emergencies. The minutes felt like hours as she waited. Every small sound made her jump, the wind outside, the ticking clock on the wall, even her own breathing. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even though she was locked away with her children. She held the bat tightly, her hands trembling, ready to protect her family if needed. When the police finally arrived, Emma's relief was overwhelming. She heard their voices outside, calling out to announce their presence. She quickly unlocked the door and let them in. The officers searched the house thoroughly, checking every room, closet, and corner. They found signs of forced entry near the front door, but whoever had broken in was already gone. What puzzled everyone was that nothing appeared to be stolen. The TV, her laptop, and even her purse were all untouched. It was as if the intruder had simply wandered through the house and left. Emma's fear didn't end when the police left. In fact, it grew stronger. The idea of a stranger walking through her home while her children slept was terrifying. She spent the rest of the night wide awake, sitting in the kids' room and watching over them. Every creak and groan of the house felt like a threat. The next morning, Emma called her parents to tell them what had happened. They offered to come stay with her for a few days, but Emma declined. She didn't want to uproot her children's routine or let them see how shaken she was. Instead, she decided to take steps to make her home safer. The first thing she did was install a security system. She chose one with motion detectors, cameras, and a loud alarm that would go off if anyone tried to break in again. She also added extra locks to the doors and windows and made sure the front yard was well lit at night. These changes gave her some peace of mind, but the fear lingered. Emma also decided to take self-defense classes. She wanted to feel more confident and prepared in case she ever faced another threat. The classes weren't easy at first. Emma wasn't used to the physical demands, and it took time to learn the techniques. But over the weeks, she started to feel stronger and more capable. The instructors were supportive, and she even made a few friends in the class who shared similar goals of feeling safer in their daily lives. As the weeks turned into months, Emma's sense of security slowly began to return. She talked to her children about the importance of locking doors and being aware of their surroundings, but she kept the details of that night to herself. She didn't want to scare them. Instead, she framed the conversations as lessons in staying safe and being responsible. The experience left a lasting impression on Emma. She became more cautious but also more resilient. She learned that while she couldn't control everything, she could take steps to protect her family and empower herself. Her home, once invaded by a stranger, was now fortified with new measures of security and filled with a renewed sense of strength. Even though the memory of that night would always linger, Emma refused to let it define her life. She continued to work hard, love her children, and cherish the little moments of joy that made her house a home. And every time she locked the door at night, she felt a little stronger, knowing she had done everything in her power to keep her family safe. The night visitor. Tom and Jenny had always dreamed of a quiet life away from the chaos of the city. They moved to a small rural farmhouse surrounded by wide open fields and thick woods. The house was old but cozy, with a wraparound porch and a fireplace that crackled warmly during chilly nights. They loved how peaceful it was. No honking cars, no noisy neighbors, just the sounds of birds during the day and crickets at night. For them, it was a dream come true. Living in the countryside came with challenges, though. Their nearest neighbor was a mile away, and the nearest town was a 20-minute drive. Tom and Jenny didn't mind the isolation. They liked their privacy. But they also knew that being so far from others made them more vulnerable. They had heard stories about break-ins and strange encounters in rural areas, but they brushed them off as rare occurrences. Still, Tom had bought a shotgun for protection, just in case. One evening in late autumn, a storm rolled in. Dark clouds gathered over the fields, and the wind began to pick up. By nightfall, rain was pouring down in heavy sheets, and the wind howled through the trees like a haunting melody. Tom and Jenny were in their living room, sitting by the fire. Tom was reading a book, and Jenny was knitting a scarf. The warmth of the fire made the storm outside feel far away, and they were content in their little bubble of comfort. Suddenly, a loud banging on the front door shattered their calm. Both of them froze. Tom looked up from his book, and Jenny's hand stopped mid-stitch. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The banging came again, harder this time. It wasn't a polite knock, it was urgent, almost frantic. "Who could that be?" Jenny whispered, her voice trembling. Tom set his book down and stood up. "I don't know. Stay here." He walked over to the fireplace and grabbed the shotgun that was propped against the wall. He checked to make sure it was loaded, and then moved toward the door. "Be careful," Jenny said, clutching her knitting tightly. Tom approached the door cautiously. The storm outside was so loud that it was hard to hear anything else. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice firm. There was no answer, just more banging. Tom glanced back at Jenny, who was watching him with wide, fearful eyes. "Don't open it," she begged. Tom hesitated. He didn't want to ignore someone who might need help, but something about the situation felt off. He decided to peek through the peephole first. He pressed his eye to the small glass circle and saw a man standing on the porch. The man was drenched from head to toe, his clothes clinging to his body. He looked desperate. "What do you want?" Tom asked through the door. The man's voice was muffled by the storm, but Tom could just make out his words. "My car broke down. I need to use your phone." Tom's grip on the shotgun tightened. Something about the man didn't sit right with him. His voice had a strange edge to it, and he wasn't looking directly at the door. He was glancing around, as if checking his surroundings. "Wait there," Tom said. He stepped away from the door and whispered to Jenny, "I don't like this. Something feels wrong." "What are you going to do?" she asked nervously. "I'm going to call the police," Tom replied. He walked over to the phone on the wall and dialed. The line rang for a moment before a dispatcher picked up. Tom quickly explained the situation. The dispatcher assured him that an officer would be sent to their address immediately. Meanwhile, the man outside grew impatient. The banging on the door became louder, more aggressive. "Let me in," he shouted. "I just need to use your phone." Jenny clutched her knitting even tighter, her knuckles white. "Tom, he's getting angry. What if he tries to break in?" Tom stood near the door, the shotgun in his hands. "He won't get in. Just stay calm." Minutes felt like hours as they waited for the police. The man continued to yell and pound on the door, his voice growing more frantic. Tom kept his eye on the peephole, watching the man's every move. The rain and wind made it hard to see clearly, but he could tell that the man was pacing back and forth on the porch, his movements erratic. Finally, the sound of sirens cut through the storm. Red and blue lights flashed in the distance, growing brighter as the police car approached. The man on the porch froze. He looked toward the lights, then turned and ran. Tom quickly unlocked the door and stepped outside, shouting to the officers, "He's running that way." The police chased after the man, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Tom and Jenny watched from the safety of their porch, their hearts pounding. After a tense few minutes, they saw the officers returning with the man in handcuffs. He struggled and yelled, but the officers kept a firm grip on him. One of the officers approached Tom and Jenny. "You did the right thing by calling us," he said. "This guy is wanted for several home invasions in the area. You might have just prevented something much worse from happening." Tom and Jenny felt a mix of relief and fear. They were safe, but the close call left them shaken. That night they hardly slept. Every creak of the old house made them jump, and the storm outside seemed to last forever. The next day they decided to take extra precautions. Tom installed reinforced locks on all the doors and windows. He also put up a motion-activated floodlight near the porch. They wanted to make sure their home was as secure as possible. The experience stayed with them for a long time. They couldn't forget the man's angry voice or the sound of him pounding on their door. It was a stark reminder that even in their peaceful countryside home, danger could still find them. From that day on, they vowed never to take their safety for granted again. Life gradually returned to normal, but Tom and Jenny remained vigilant. They kept the shotgun close and made sure to always lock their doors, even during the day. The farmhouse was still their dream home, but it no longer felt quite as isolated from the rest of the world. They had learned that in the quietest places, unexpected dangers could still lurk, and being prepared was the best way to stay safe. The Attic Nightmare. Samantha was a quiet, reserved woman in her early 30s. She had recently inherited her grandmother's house, an old Victorian-style home that had been in the family for generations. Samantha loved the house for its charm and history, but it was far from perfect. It had creaky wooden floors, drafty windows, and an attic that always seemed a little too eerie for comfort. Still, Samantha felt a sense of duty to live there and keep the family legacy alive. The house stood on a large piece of land, surrounded by tall trees that swayed with the wind. During the day, the sunlight filtering through the leaves made the place feel magical. But at night, the house transformed. Shadows danced on the walls, the wind howled through the cracks, and the creaks of the old floors became louder. Samantha often told herself these were just the quirks of an old house, nothing more. For the first few weeks, Samantha settled in comfortably. She spent her days fixing up the house, unpacking her grandmother's belongings, and decorating the rooms to her taste. It was hard work, but she enjoyed it. She felt a deep connection to the house, and to her grandmother, who had always been a significant figure in her life. Samantha was determined to make the house her own while preserving its character. But as the days turned into weeks, Samantha began to notice odd things. It started small. A door she thought she had closed would be open, or an item she placed on a table would be in a slightly different spot. At first, she brushed these off as her imagination or forgetfulness. After all, living alone in a big house can make anyone feel a little paranoid. One evening, as Samantha was reading in the living room, she heard a faint noise coming from upstairs. It was soft, almost like a whisper. She paused, listening closely. The sound stopped. Shaking her head, she laughed nervously at herself. "It's just the wind," she muttered. But the noises didn't stop. Over the next few nights, Samantha heard more sounds: faint footsteps, the creak of the attic floor, and an occasional dragging noise. Each time, she would stop what she was doing and listen, her heart pounding in her chest. The rational part of her tried to explain it away. Maybe it was mice. Maybe the old house was settling. But deep down, she felt uneasy. One night, the noises grew louder. Samantha was lying in bed, trying to sleep, when she heard a distinct thud above her. It was as if something heavy had fallen in the attic. She sat up, her breath catching in her throat. Grabbing her phone, she turned on the flashlight and pointed it toward the ceiling. She knew she couldn't ignore it anymore. The next morning, Samantha decided to investigate. She went to the hardware store and bought a sturdy flashlight and a can of pepper spray. Just in case, she thought. She waited until the sun was high in the sky before making her way to the attic door. The narrow staircase leading up to the attic was dusty and steep. Each step creaked loudly, making her feel more anxious with every movement. When she reached the top, Samantha hesitated. She stood in front of the attic door, her heart racing. Taking a deep breath, she pushed it open. The attic was dimly lit by a small, round window on one side. Dust particles floated in the air, and the wooden beams above her head cast long shadows. The room was cluttered with old furniture, boxes, and other forgotten items. At first glance, everything seemed normal. But as Samantha moved deeper into the attic, she noticed something strange. In one corner of the room, there was a makeshift bed made of blankets and a thin mattress. Next to it was a small lantern, some empty food wrappers, a few personal items like a toothbrush and a worn-out book. Samantha froze. Someone had been living here. Her mind raced. Who could it be? How long had they been here? Why hadn't she noticed before? The thought of someone sneaking into her house and hiding in her attic made her feel sick. She backed away slowly, her hands trembling. Without thinking twice, she turned and ran down the stairs, nearly tripping in her haste. Once she was back on the ground floor, Samantha locked herself in the living room and called the police. Her voice shook as she explained the situation to the dispatcher. The operator assured her that officers would be there soon. Samantha sat on the couch, clutching the pepper spray, her eyes fixed on the staircase leading to the attic. When the police arrived, they searched the attic thoroughly. Samantha watched nervously as they moved boxes and inspected every corner. After a while, one of the officers came down to speak with her. "We didn't find anyone," he said, "but we did find this." He held up a flashlight and pointed toward the attic. "There's a trapdoor up there that leads to the roof. It's possible the person escaped that way." Samantha's stomach dropped. The thought of someone sneaking around her house and escaping without a trace was horrifying. The officers promised to patrol the area and advised her to stay somewhere else for a while. But Samantha didn't have anywhere else to go. She thanked them and decided to stay in the house for one more night. That night, Samantha couldn't sleep. Every creak and rustle made her jump. She kept the lights on and stayed in the living room, clutching her pepper spray. She replayed the events in her mind, trying to make sense of what had happened. Who was this person? Why had they chosen her house? More importantly, would they come back? The next morning, Samantha made a decision. She couldn't live in fear. She called a real estate agent and put the house on the market. It wasn't an easy choice. The house held so many memories and she had hoped to make it her home. But her safety and peace of mind were more important. While waiting for the house to sell, Samantha stayed at a friend's place. She didn't tell many people about what had happened, fearing they wouldn't believe her or would think she was overreacting. But the experience had left her shaken. She found herself double-checking locks and looking over her shoulder wherever she went. A few weeks later, the house sold to a young couple who loved its historic charm. Samantha felt a mix of relief and sadness as she handed over the keys. She hoped they would be safe and that the intruder would never return. Samantha moved into a modern apartment with security features, including cameras and a 24-hour doorman. The experience in the Victorian house had taught her the importance of trusting her instincts and taking precautions. While she still felt uneasy at times, she was determined to move forward and leave the past behind. But sometimes late at night, Samantha would wake up and swear she heard faint whispers. She would remind herself that she was safe, that the house was behind her. Yet, a small part of her couldn't shake the feeling that she would never truly escape the nightmare of the attic.